Hello, this is Pat Ivestall, member of the Historical Committee. We're here this afternoon to interview Mr. William L. Holladay. Mr. Holladay, I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Pat.
I'd like to find out a little bit about your background.
All right.
Can you tell me when you were born or where and your folks?
I was born in 1901, so I'm now 93 years old, approaching 94. I was born in Missouri. My father and my grandfather were partners together in a small hotel. Incidentally, many years later, my wife and I traveled back to Missouri to see if the hotel was still there. We approached the little town of Fayette, Missouri, and there was the Hotel Howard with a sign on it saying 26 rooms, all modern. I think that meant there was a bathroom at the end of the hall. And when I was 3 years old, my mother tragically died in childbirth, and the family decided, I think as a result of that, to move to California, where my father was in the hotel business. I was a sickly little runt, and it was agreed by the family that I should be brought up by grandparents, because my father and later my stepmother and he lived in a hotel which he ran until he retired many years later. So I grew up in Inglewood, went to grammar school and high school there, graduated from high school in 1919, and started to college at something called the Southern Branch of the University of California, which occupied buildings on North Vermont Avenue, which formerly was a normal school. That SBUC later became UCLA, and the buildings have reverted to a normal school since that time. It had only lower division engineering work, and at the end of the first 2 years, I expected to go on to Berkeley, having become thoroughly indoctrinated in the great Golden Bear traditions. And my father said, "Now look, William Lee, you know you can't go to Berkeley. You're the only member of the family who was in a position to live with Ma, my grandmother, and there's a little school over in Pasadena called Troop or something, and you can learn engineering there." And so that was the situation. I went with this little school over in Pasadena, which turned out to be the California Institute of Technology. And I learned very quickly. As a matter of fact, at the first midterm examination, what kind of a school I was going to. It was one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me.
How did you happen to become interested in engineering or choose that field since your father was in hotel work?
Well, when I was about 10 years old, I built my first wireless set. And I think I knew very early in life that I wanted to be somebody who could work with machinery and tools and electricity and things like that. My dear father, God bless him, never indicated to me in any way that he was disappointed that I did not follow him. And he was a third-generation hotel man, but he always accepted my decision, as I have accepted the decisions of my children as to what their vocation should be and what their life should be like.
So in high school, did you just take the normal classes? Mm-hmm. And then you immediately knew when you went into college that you were going to study engineering?
I think the decision was made sometime during high school. Yes, because I became a radio ham. Any radio hams now have call letters which run up to 3 or 4 letters and numbers, but my call letter, as I remember, was 6 dB, and the people that have to have 5-letter symbols now don't believe that, but that's the way it was in those days. I had to quit being a radio ham when World War I came along, That put us out of business, but I reestablished that when the World War I was over, and continued as a ham until academic work took most of my attention.
I see. Now you're in college, and you've decided to major in what field of engineering?
Electrical engineering, because radio had got me real thrilled with electricity and its many possibilities. And I graduated from Caltech in 1924 with a Bachelor of Science in EE, and was chosen, fortunately for me, as a General Electric test man. So I spent a year in Schenectady testing equipment manufactured by the General Electric Company. And then there came time for a final assignment. I had several possibilities of going into various General Electric departments that are looking for people. But the personnel man, and I can still remember his quotations, he said, "Oh, by the way, Bill, there's a man named W.P. White who is starting something, a new division for something called a household refrigerator. And he's looking for people. He's over in Building 2. Why don't you stop and see him?" So Building 2 was closer, and I went there first and never went any further. After the boss and his secretary, I was the first employee of General Electric's electric refrigerator division, which later became the electric refrigeration department and has grown into the very large department that General Electric now has for the building of all kinds of household appliances.
Well, that is very, what year did that get started?
1925.
1925. And you watched that department grow, and,
yes.
And you were put in charge of the whole?
Well, I first went to Dallas as the district refrigerator representative, selling their very early and not very efficient models, which, by the way, are described in the paper which was published in the September Journal about the General Electric monitor top. And then at my own suggestion, I was transferred back to Southern California, where I joined the newly formed distributorship, the George Belsey Company, and that's B-E-L-S-E-Y, as a product manager. I was in charge of warehousing, deliveries, and service. And I stayed on that job for 14 years.
Now, all this in your work career, how was your personal life? Were you getting involved with your wife, or your soon-to-be wife, or how did this happen?
Very much so. I was learning to play the piano when I was still in high school, and I practiced on the piano in the front living room of our little house, which was next to the high school. And I noticed this beautiful little brunette which would walk by on the way to high school, and wondered who she was. Discovered that she was palling around with the sister of one of my closest friends. I got acquainted with her. We were dating before she was 16, and we were engaged for 3 years. We were engaged during the time I was in Schenectady. We wrote to each other every day. We once tried to telephone each other. She didn't have a telephone, and the boarding house where I lived didn't have one either, but we each arranged to get to a place that had a telephone. And I placed a call to her at 12 o'clock. There were storms between the East Coast and the West Coast, and it took 3 hours for us to get the call through. We shouted at each other for about half an hour. Neither of us understood a word the other one said, and we never tried telephoning again. This was in 1925.
1925. That was just when you were starting in at W.
Well, it was toward the end of my test
GE.
days.
Yeah, at the end of your test days.
So we made do for 14 months with correspondence. I got home Tuesday afternoon on the California Limited. We had a church wedding Thursday night.
Oh.
That was September 25, September 24, 1925.
And your wife's name?
Louise.
Louise.
Yeah. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 96 pounds.
Oh, full of dynamite. Well, so she helped you along your road to the
All her life.
engineering profession you enjoy.
Yeah, when I became president of ASHRAE, she of course became First Lady. And I'm told that by other presidential members and other First Ladies whom I have seen, that she was a model for all of those who followed her. In all seriousness, she brought grace and dignity and beauty to the position of First Lady, and soon became as greatly beloved by ASHRAE members as she was by her family and by me. She was a great lady.
Well, I should think so.
We were married for 69 years.
69 years. Yeah. That's a nice lifetime together. How did you become involved with ASHRAE while you were doing all these other activities?
In 1930, ASRE, the American Society of Refrigerating Engineers, was a group of icemen, that is, men who designed and operated ice plants. And I obtained an application for admission, sent it to the admissions committee, and got back a letter. They were very puzzled. They said, "We think you are qualified for membership, but we don't understand why you want to join." And I explained that my letter, that I wanted to join to become a better refrigerating engineer, and that seemed like a good reason, so they let me in. So sometime in 1930, I became a member of the American Society of Refrigerating Engineers, and I honestly believe that I was the first member of what is now known as the white goods industry that ever joined the society. And
White goods?
Yeah, two years later, I found there were a few other members of ASRE who lived in and around Los Angeles, and I was instrumental in establishing the first chapter of ASRE west of the Mississippi River. First section. In ASRE days, they were called sections. And somewhat to my surprise, I became the charter chairman. ASRE had chairman instead of presidents. It was the first time I had learned that any person that starts something is nearly always elected the first president. And I became president of the chapter twice on later occasions when they couldn't get anybody else to serve, but that's another story. So I've been president of the Southern California chapter 3 times in all.
3 times. And that makes you a member of ASHRAE since 1930. Well, it wasn't ASHRAE, but
they merged in 1959.
1959. That's when the regional structure started.
Because I didn't have to go to 2 meetings a month. I also belonged to the heating and air conditioning group, which became the other predecessor society.
Was there much controversy at the time when all these groups were talking about joining?
The merger, in which I was unable to take any part because of my job demands at the time, was a highly controversial situation. The refrigerating people and the air conditioning and heating and ventilating people were suspicious of the other group. Each one was afraid the other one was going to, quote, take over. But some very good minds the late, great Arthur Hess, the late, great Dan Weil. I think of two, and there were others whose names don't come to me, worked out the merger in detail. And interestingly enough, of course, each one of the societies had a group of people just waiting to go up the ladder and be president. And they settled that situation by having alternating presidents in successive years, each one serving only 6 months.
From each society.
Until they got rid of all the potential presidents, and then they started working as a merged organization.
What was the name of that merge? Was that ASHRAE?
That was ASHRAE.
That was
That
ASHRAE
became
in
ASHRAE.
1959.
1959, that's correct.
And had you been a member of how many chapters by this time?
Well, I think there was only one chapter in Southern California, the one in Los Angeles. I think the Orange Empire, the San Diego, and the Inland Empire, which is the Riverside San Bernardino group, have all been formed since 1959. I could be in error on that.
Were you, you were president of one chapter, and did you preside in
I didn't become president of any others. I was part of the charter party on the Orange Empire chapter. I have a photograph of the four of us who arranged for the first meeting. Mr. Ken Watts of the Southern California and Orange Empire chapter is very proud of the letter of the picture of the four of us who established that chapter and were present at its first meeting.
Yes, it is. It's nice to have pictures like that. What about regional experience then in 1959? Did you get involved in the region work?
I got on the board probably about 1962 or 3. And I served 2 or 3 years on the board. And by that time, somebody apparently thought I was a presidential timber and asked me if I would be interested in going further. Obviously, I was. The nominating committee was a little worried because I was, by that time, getting pretty elderly. I was 65, and so they allowed me to skip the office of treasurer, made me an immediate vice president, then president-elect, and I went in as president in 1968 and served for 1 year. The president who preceded me was the late, great Peanut Vinther, V-I-N-T-H-E-R, who gave me full responsibility during my year as president-elect. Every time some chapter wanted me to come and address it, Peanut would always turn the job over to me because he didn't like to travel. I did the traditional job as president-elect of going to the Ontario chapter and addressing them at their first meeting of the year. During the meeting, they, of course, gave me the usual city tours and took me out on the battlefields. And I well remember one of the Ontario chapter members explaining how these battles occurred, how our forces were over here and the enemy was over here and so on. It took me about 5 minutes to realize that the enemy he was talking about was really us. And so we were, at that time, having a war with Canada, but we don't have one of those anymore. Canada, by the way, plays and has always played a very important part in ASHRAE affairs. It represents approximately 10% of the ASHRAE membership, and the people who get appointed, who appoint the members to committees, are very careful to see that there is nearly always, I'll correct that, always a Canadian member on every committee. They and that at least once every 10 years there is a Canadian president. And the Canadian contingency is very important in ASHRAE affairs, and I strongly suspect that the new international chapters will become equally important.
Yes. Thinking back the year that you were president, can you think how the times around you affected your presidency? It seems like I remember '68 was kind of a volatile year with assassinations and political trouble. Did that?
Curiously enough, I don't remember any of those things. I was pretty busy. Well, in 1968, ASHRAE had about 30,000 members. It now has nearly double that. It had only about 100 chapters. It now has over 150. But still, for the year as president-elect and the presidential year, Louise and I traveled about 50,000 miles each year. And my partners were not always happy with the fact that I actually spent over 90 days away from the office during each of those 2 years. Nowadays, a president has to give up his job in order to serve as ASHRAE president for at least a year. But I still worked and managed to put in at least 30 or 40 hours a week on my job to keep my partners happy.
Did you go overseas with ASHRAE at that time?
No, we did not have any overseas chapters. In 1982 or 3, Clint Phillips called me and asked me if Louise and I would like to go to South America to present to the association in Bogota, Colombia, an organization known as ACAIRE, A-C-A-I-R-E, and I can't tell you what they mean in Spanish, a certificate of association with ASHRAE. We were delighted to do so. We made good friends down there that we still have, whom we still have. We also went on to Lima, to Cusco, and to Machu Picchu, which was one of my childhood ambitions. I will interject here that the 3 things I wanted to see when I studied geography in grammar school were the great Acropolis in Athens, Stonehenge in southeast England, and Machu Picchu in South America. Eventually, we got to see them all.
Now that you reflect back on your time with ASHRAE, what would you say to future ASHRAE people about becoming members, or future potential members?
The thing which has always impressed me with ASHRAE is not its great research program or its technical advancements by papers and meetings, or even its chapter activities and its national activities, but the quality of the friendships that are formed by this group. I have belonged to several other technical organizations, and they don't have the same spirit that ASHRAE does, and I am very sincere. If anyone has followed me around during the last few days here and seen my welcome by our old friends, because I have not been active for the last 7 years because of Louise's illness and death, you know it's absolutely right. This organization creates friendships as well as engineering papers and research projects and meetings and things like that. And I think it's one of the most important things about it.
That's an interesting view. Can you explain to me about the Louise and Bill Holladay Award and how that came about?
Well, yes, and I'll be a little more specific than I was in the meeting on Saturday. I had been a partner in an engineering office starting in 1952, which operated as a design office in Los Angeles over a period of about 20 years, and then we came upon very hard times due to the aerospace depression. And in 1972, we threw in the towel and went broke. And so I went home and thought I was through with engineering, but the phone began to ring, and for another 16 years, I operated a little consulting office out of my home and did very well indeed. And one day I was explaining to Louise where all these jobs came from, and the fact that 75 or 80% of them had come either from my association with ASHRAE or from direct ASHRAE recommendations. And Louise said to me, "Bill, we've got to do something to pay ASHRAE back." And so we decided that the fellows who had already been elevated to a higher grade of membership, I'm getting ungrammatical here, but we thought we should pick out the fellows who, even after their elevation, continued their research and technical work, and to give them this title of Distinguished Fellow, along with a little bronze medal which reads the Louise and Bill Holladay Medal. And the first recipient, as I said from the platform Saturday, was the late great Carlisle Ashley. Others have been Dan Weil, Ole Fanger, Frank Faust. Oh, there have been, I think, 16, and I can't remember the names of all of them. what is the name of the man who is chairman today?
Are you speaking of Mr. Hayter or Press McNall? Press McNall.
Yeah, Press McNall received the award just last year.
Yes.
And he's been very active and highly technical in research work, and he received it for that reason. That was how that came about. I've had a couple of projects with ASHRAE that have interested me, and if you don't mind, maybe I can chat about them for such time as we have left. I became interested back in the 50s about the problem of design temperatures. A design temperature is a temperature chosen by the engineer to use in his calculations of size of both cooling and heating equipment. And I was working for a company that was making a product that was peculiarly sensitive to outdoor temperatures. It's known now as an air, off the record a moment while I think of the right word, an air source heat pump. And so from that time, I studied that, wrote a number of papers on possible design temperatures, and eventually with a great consulting meteorologist in Denver named Lauren W. Crow, developed a method of establishing design temperatures which has been accepted by all of Region 10, by the state of Washington, and because of Lauren Crow's activity, he is located in Denver, by the Rocky Mountain Group. It has never been accepted by the rest of the society, largely because of the activities of a group, a military group, and the Weather Data Committee, which has stuck to a method proposed back in the 40s or very early 50s by the late William T. Smith of the Air Force. William T. Smith's method was an extremely good one at the time. It coalesced and established a quite good method in comparison to half a dozen different and conflicting methods for establishing design temperatures. Mr. Crow and I think that we have improved that somewhat, and we published a book in 1982 for establishing design temperatures in Region 10, which at that time consisted of 4 states, Arizona, California, Hawaii, and Nevada. That booklet has been accepted completely throughout Region 10 and is in general use in design offices and contracting offices. That's a project of which I am somewhat proud. A second project on which I am now involved is the matter of financing scholarships, which are established by the Southern California chapter. In 1955, the chapter had built up a fund of about $55,000, almost entirely in bonds, and was occasionally giving a few $1,000s a year in scholarships to students who said they were interested in the field of air conditioning. Some inspired individual on the board of directors said one day in a meeting, look, the stock market is going great. Why do we keep all these bonds? Why don't we put our money into stocks and have this fund actually build up to something and give some scholarships that amount to something? Holladay heard the cry and volunteered to take over such a fund. Into it, and his offer was accepted, by the way, and the committee and I took over this $55,000 about the middle of 1988, and in a period of 4 years, we built it to something like $120,000. The method used was very simple. I happen to be the trustee of my family trust, and I only put into the ASHRAE funds the very best companies in the Holladay family trust, the result of which in 4 years we had a total annual return of almost exactly 20%. Now maybe some of you have heard of the Dearborn, is that right? I don't think it's quite right. You may have to look this up and edit it. Ladies Club, which which gets a total return of 23.4%, and they've even published a book explaining it. But nevertheless, 20% is within reaching distance of it, and from that fund we have now disbursed nearly $40,000 to students who say that they are interested in this business of air conditioning. The fund now varies between about $100,000 and $110,000. What we do each year is to allow it to build up to $110,000 and give $10,000 in scholarships, bringing it back to $100,000. Then we start all over again, and we work with the scholarship committee who chooses the students, and we think that we have done pretty well in that area. Actually, I think our record has been somewhat better than that of the headquarters office, which also has a scholarship program.
Well,
so those are my 2 big projects.
that is a very important thing to mention. Before we wrap up, I guess I missed your children. You mentioned you had children, and Are they in the industry, or did
No, I followed my father's footsteps and allowed our children to do as they pleased. We have two boys and a girl. The older son is a world authority on the book of Jeremiah and is a professor of Old Testament at Andover Newton Theological School near Boston. Our second son is a computer programmer for a manufacturing company that builds production lines. Our daughter is married to a retired teacher who used to teach architectural drafting and the design of buildings. So we have 10 grandchildren ranging in age from 15 to 40. We have 7 great-grandchildren, and there may be others coming that we don't yet know about.
Well, that's a wonderful family that you've formed. Do you have any other last comments that you'd like to make about ASHRAE? What influenced you in your career, or what plans you have for the future?
I think it would be fair to say that ASHRAE, beginning as early as 1930 and up to 1988, was the major hobby in our lives. It was our service club, it was our church, it was the thing that we were most interested in. Louise and I, for many years, attended the 2 big meetings a year, plus my activities in the local chapters. The chapters have, as well as headquarters, as long as the society, I should say, have certainly honored me highly. They have richly repaid me in honors and other rewards for everything that I was able to do for them. They have given me some of my finest and closest friends, and they have had a great influence on my life.
And you're going to continue coming to the meetings now?
I hope to continue.
Well, that will be great for everyone to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.